Smith. Hi, Jeff.
Greetings, Jim.
Another glorious day here between California and Colorado, and don't know what the day's like in Peru, but I want to say hi to our good friend and a good friend of the show, Paul. And Paul is coming to us live from Peru at his center Tantric in Pisac, Peru, in the Sacred Valley. And we're thrilled to have him here today to talk about this whole idea of journeying. Paul's got a huge background. If you've not met him before or have not heard him on our podcast before, quite an extraordinary human being with a huge background in having worked with and trained with 3 different shamans. Was it 3 different degrees, Paul, that you have, in addition to being a teacher and all of that other good stuff?
There's a whole bunch of different stuff there, academic and practical.
What's that?
I just said there's a whole bunch of different things I've been involved with over the years, both academic and practical study and, hands-on.
Yep. So there's a lot of great stuff there. You can check out more about Paul also when we, after the podcast, we'll put some information in the description to give you some connection points to Paul as well. Has a successful center in Peru that is doing well, and we're grateful to have you here and excited to get into this topic today on journeying. I guess let's start with a conversation about what it means to journey. What is it? What is this journeying thing?
Me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul. I should have said, yeah, Paul. Hey, Paul,
Yeah.
What is? Yes, please. Just to get it all.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting word, of course. It's become sort of quite a broad spectrum kind of word applying to different sort of areas of shamanic practice, really. Of course, we can differentiate it really into these 2 major categories, I would suggest, those with plant medicines and those journeys without plant medicines. And of course, both are available and both are very useful. They both have their own applicability depending on circumstance and need, skill and desire even. When Mircea Eliade wrote about his classic study of shamanism, there was this suggestion that plant-based medicines were somehow a degradation of shamanism. The traditional shamanism didn't actually utilize entheogenic medicines or plant-based medicines in order to journey. That's been shown to be quite an erroneous view, and that actually humanity has engaged with both plant-based journey work and non-based plant journey work really since day one. The moment we were able to realize that we could go inside and experience other realms, other states and conditions of consciousness, we did that. I mean, we got interested very quickly in whatever way we could get inside, whether it was by trance or whether it was by, flagellation or fasting or spinning or plants, whatever it was, we took that opportunity, really. So I disagree with Eliade on that level, and I think that actually, again, both are useful. The plant-based medicines, of course, we go very deep. We have very strong experiences, and there's no kind of denying the viscosity and the power of those kinds of experiences. The moment you ingest the medicines, you're kind of taken on a ride. Whereas, of course, if we try and journey, of course, without medicines, it's not usually so powerful or phenomenological, but nonetheless can still be very transformative and very, useful in our own personal journey, can bring us a lot of benefit. And, I think both have value, and we should experience both. To learn that we can do it without plants is very, very powerful, to learn that we have power in and of ourselves. But also to be taken over by the power of the medicines and actually forcibly taken on this inner journey is very good for people of a stubborn mindset or a kind of a hard-heartedness, kind of breaks down those barriers and you have little choice but to go with it. It's easy when you're journeying without to kind of fall into the trap of dismissing your experience as being just your imagination or something like this. And although I have something to say about the nature of the imagination, you know, in the plant-based medicines, there's no kind of denying that something very, very powerful is happening. You can't really put it down to that kind of category. Whereas when you're doing those kind of journeys on your own, it's easy to fall into that kind of belief that maybe you're making it all up, or it isn't. You know, it's not real, as it were. Of course, we have to question the nature of reality and what that is when we're discussing these things anyway. I mean, you know, what is reality in any of these realms? When we come to accept that the nature of reality is the nature of consciousness itself, it doesn't necessarily matter what the tool by which we engage that consciousness is, you know, whether it's our own meditative experience or whether it's plants, you know, whatever. So
very cool. I like the idea actually that there is some clarity about non-plant-based and plant-based, that you can actually create that experience, and that I'd like to dive into that at some point, and that may not be the topic for today, but the idea was to understand that this process of expansion or enlightenment or transformation, whatever it is all about changing state. So however you get there, if you need the plant medicine or want the plant or feel drawn to the plant medicine because it can catapult something, that's awesome. If not, then seek it through other means, you know, means of meditation and quietness and learning how to direct your energy deeper and deeper into self is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. I mean, shamanism is composed of three aspects, in my view. A tradition or a cult or an individual has to have three different elements in order to be a shamanic thing. The first being altered states of consciousness. If you're not able to enter into altered states of consciousness, or altered states of consciousness are not involved in your work, it's not actually shamanism, in my view. And of course, there are millions of ways to alter consciousness. Humanity has developed many over the millennia. You know, we got interested in it, as I said. You know, we've been interested in the nature of our own selves, and we've explored it to considerable depth.
Yeah.
So many ways.
There's two pieces of this discussion we're having I'd like to pitch in. One is, in order to know what journeying is, we also have to know what it isn't as well. So I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about the word Jim used with creating a state change. From my own personal experiences that are lining up with some of the things that I've been reading and studying, there's another aspect of plant-based medicines that people have used that they call it tripping. And we're getting some background noise. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but that's interesting that it's showing up right now. It's like somebody's hacked into our show or something.
Yeah, it's not following any speaking pattern that's going on here. So, but we'll carry on and pass that on.
Keep going. We'll just acknowledge it and push through.
Yeah.
So the word tripping, sometimes people that use plant-based medicines call it a trip, which is, for me, more synonymous with the party use or more of a casual use as opposed to a spiritual use, or more of a carnal or maybe even hedonistic intention or use when you're tripping. So the idea of being on a journey is that you're going somewhere. The idea of a journey is I am going somewhere. And what seems to be most important for the journey is that you state an intention of where you would like the medicine to point you in the direction or begin to take you on this journey. That it's an exploration of, as Paul has talked before on the show, about consciousness and about what the human experience is. So I think it's important for our listeners to differentiate between tripping and journeying. Again, just as a simple overview or review, tripping to me would be, let's do it as a group, and it's kind of a party thing. Let's all go to Vegas and take some shrooms and we'll trip. And it's like an external sensory enhancer, and it's more involving the body where journeying would be more involving the mind and the spirit. And what I've noticed about my journeys is that it tends to be, although my senses get a lot more heightened, I have no ability. If I wanted to get aroused and have sex on a high dose of plant-based medicines, I can't. It's like that part of the physiology is not in sync with my mind. It's almost as if switches are set up such that the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems are deactivated, to where the concentration of energy is going to be so much more cerebral and spiritual than it is bodily. That's been my experience. That a journey is about consciousness, the mind, and the heart work goes along with it. That would be spirit, and it's not about body. Body is actually, for me, like shut down, and that's why I'm calm and quiet and more sedate. Is that it's not something that you take and go to a disco or go to a rave and play around with.
Yeah, that's some good stuff. Paul, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, unfortunately, we've had lots of different names for these sorts of experiences over the years, haven't we? And how we've moved from psychedelic to entheogenic, and these are interesting movements, and they're useful terms in some way. But I think that even the person going to the rave and taking psychedelics for kind of hedonistic purposes can sometimes be shocked into the realization that there's something a little bit bigger going on, and that perhaps it might even be a doorway for them. I'm certainly not encouraging its usage, but it's difficult in some ways to take high doses of psychedelics or plant-based medicines without experiencing these inner realms, in my view. I mean, perhaps I'm being naive and that's my own experience only, but I definitely find it very difficult in my own experience and in the people that I've worked with for us kind of not to go to these realms. It's like actually it blasts the doors wide open. And of course, people do take these things, in hedonistic environments, etc. But I suggest that they're doing it for spiritual reasons. Ultimately, I think people take spiritual, actually. Ultimately, the addiction and things of this nature are really soul loss, and that's what they're looking for. And perhaps they're finding it on the ecstasy or the LSD, or etc. So, but it's a question. Of course, the journey bit is because do we truly go anywhere? In any sense, of course, we're only moving inwards. There's no spatial difference in our relationship to where we are when we've taken them. But of course, we do seem to open up doorways to other dimensions, to other portals of being inside of ourselves, which, back out onto consciousness itself. Ultimately, by going inward, we can only, we have to say, ultimately, we're engaging with none other than the substance of mind, where else, we're not leaving the physical environment that we're in. Now, we may be having some kind of astral experience, we may be physically leaving the body, but we may not in our medicine experience or in our trance states, leaving the physical body. But certainly, dimensions and doorways opening up within us onto vast vistas of incomprehensible extent. There's extraordinary stuff in there. There's realms, there's beings, there's planets and stars, and of course, from the traditional spiritual perspective, everything that is inside is outside, and everything that is outside is inside, including the multidimensionality of the universe.
So ultimately, the whole idea of journey is about inward travel. Inward, we're going to call it travel because that seems to be the lexicon we're in here. But I want to kind of get a grip too on this idea. You used a word when you, I think you, did you say altered? Is that the word that you were, I'm trying to remember the word you used when you talked about, because we kind of referenced state change, and you used a different word that I was wondering if there's a difference between being altered and being in a state change. If there's some, it was about,
this is,
go ahead.
yeah. It's a traditional term, you know. This is Charles Tart. Charles Tart wrote the classic text. Altered States of Consciousness was the title of the book. He was the first one to suggest that term, and it just got used kind of academically to describe state change, basically. You know, that there is a kind of a norm that we exist in from day to day, and then, you know, we're able to move around that. William James also, of course, in his classic study, The Varieties of Religious Experience, back in the 1900s, of course, you know, this is exactly what he was describing. Of course, he was using ether and gas to change state, and later mescaline. But you know, the idea was there early that there was a norm, and we were able to, you know, move away from that norm into other realms, other ways of being, other ways of perceiving.
I find it interesting that when we're using the idea of an altered state, altered generally would mean not normal, right? But what if we actually have it backwards? What if the state that we're in most of the time is the altered version of what actually is? And under the influence of the plant-based medicines, we're getting to see how the universe actually is in that state, where you have so much focus and concentration on consciousness that you're getting to see what truly is. And when we are off or not under the influence of the medicines, we're coming back to, for me now, what's becoming an altered state of consciousness is when I'm not in the space or the influence of the medicine. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, this is Huxley's mind. Yeah, this is Huxley's mind at large. You know, this is brain as the filter of reality, not as the progenitor or generator of reality, but as the filter upon a larger reality that we only make contact with via altered states. I have another one for you, though. I mean, the thing is, firstly, I think we need to, you know, accept the relativity of perception, in the sense that actually all realities are valid in and of their own right, but none of them are ultimate reality. They only partake of ultimate reality or have their foundation in ultimate reality. It's like we can't denigrate, or we shouldn't denigrate, in my view, in the way that some of the Eastern mystical traditions have done, the day-to-day reality. I mean, you know, it's as real as those other states, and those other states are as real as this. You know, they're all equal to each other, in my view, because they're all have this basis in the same fundamental energy, in the fundamental matrix of energy, consciousness, and mind. You know, wisdom consciousness in the Buddhist tradition, or, you know, energy and consciousness in the Tantric tradition. This is the fundamental basis of all of it. So they're all both equally real, and they're all equally unreal. And I would suggest that it has a lot to do with the neurotransmitters that are acting in the brain in a particular time. I think that when we were younger, both as a species and individually, in the phylogeny kind of mirrors ontogeny, you know, the development of the individual maps and mirrors the development of the species as a whole. And that there was a time when we both individually and collectively had the primary neurotransmitter dimethyltryptamine as our primary mode of perception. Like, dimethyltryptamine was actually, you know, our fundamental day-to-day reality as tiny children and as a species. And later on, as we grow to adulthood and puberty, serotonin takes over as the primary neurotransmitter and becomes the new norm. So when we take particular experiencing is our own young brain and the collective memory of what we were as a species before serotonin took over and made everything very kind of solid and physical and three-dimensional in the way that we perceive it. Because consciousness, as understood, by the mystery schools evolves. So one mode or means of evolution in terms of consciousness is, via the primary neurotransmitters that are active in the brain, which fundamentally, give view to our experience. The neurotransmitters that are running through our system are how we perceive reality. So it's another idea.
Dig that. Let's dive a little bit into, so for the listeners and people that are engaging with our live cast and our podcast, we're here today talking with Jeff and Paul about the idea of journeying, of using plant medicine or not plant medicine to kind of dive into our own experience in a very profound way. One of the things that, or some of the things that can be challenging are some of the misconceptions that are out there about plant-based medicine and what it can do, what it can't do, what it will do, what it might do. So we want to spend a little time talking about some of the top 5 things that we're seeing that, I know Paul has seen and we've talked about at different times about what are these misconceptions? What is it that people might be trying to understand or want to understand that they maybe can't through plant medicine or alternatively? So the first piece of that is the idea of subjective versus objective, the self versus other. That's a big one. Let's just start with the big mouthful and see where we go.
It is. Yeah.
So what is the journey? Is the journey subjective?
Yeah. Well, this was. Yeah. But this is my number one. The really big crux of it, and where 99.9% of people who are engaging with this type of work go, in my view, wrong. They've got the wrong end of the stick, and in grasping the wrong end of the stick, they've misunderstood the whole process and many other aspects about the nature of the journey, as well as the nature of reality at large. So traditionally, of course, shamanism has been very dualistic and very objective in its view of the phenomenon that it experiences in its set of techniques, in the technologies involved. Of course, shamanism has never been a religion. It's only ever been a set of techniques in order to make contact with the other world, essentially, for healing purposes and other. But that's been its main modality. So it's had this view that you're engaging with very real, objective worlds, and this is a novel idea. In fact, I mean, it was an idea that took precedence, in Neolithic era, hunter-gatherer era, and sort of lasted really up until around the Bronze Age. Traditions evolved and came up with some newer ideas, and as it moved over to the Eastern model of spirituality, this idea of an objective other world that you were engaging with, and other physical beings who had autonomy and individual identity and individualized essence, was sort of turned on its head. The Eastern view, of course, was that really essentially, life was a dream, and that everything that was experienced was of the nature of a dream, and not just in terms of its ephemeralness, not just in terms of its transitoriness, but also in terms of its was, according to the meditative traditions of the East, pure mind stuff, consciousness only, that there wasn't an objective other to be found anywhere, inside or outside, no matter what realm one was engaging with. The realm one was engaging with was a realm of mind only. A panpsychism where consciousness is everything that is experienced and seen, and it has, a singular root, a singular cause, or a singular spread out across all things. And I think that this is a very, very valuable contribution to understanding our experience in these interior worlds. I feel that if we do take them to be objective other, and if we do think that we're engaging with other beings, etc., we fall into difficulty, we fall into a mind trap, in fact, that we actually continue to perpetuate over and over again, not of meditation in our daily lives also, like misapprehending, miscomprehending the nature of reality at large, you know, misapprehending the nature of our own selves, misapprehending the nature of reality at large. And in taking that into medicine, we can just get caught in these cycles where we seek to perpetuate an illusory condition. It's only illusory in the sense that we misapprehend it or misunderstand it, not illusory in the nature that we're not experiencing it. We are experiencing it, but we're misunderstanding it as being something, you know, out there that we are experiencing, rather than in here and of this also, rather than of other and being out there. You know, it's obvious to me when we take these medicines that firstly, of course, we're not going anywhere on a physical level. We're not moving. We're still within our own physical space. You know, we're lying on our bed or whatever it may be. And yet somehow we're able to open up to all of these realms and vistas of consciousness. And it seems so obvious to me that that is because these realms are in us and of us, that they partake of our own nature. We're moving into our own interior being. And yes, we've misunderstood the interior self. We think that it's objective in the same way that we think the exterior world is some kind of objective other. But when we apply these Eastern models, we understand, or at least we can begin to comprehend, the nature of reality as being identical to that of the dream, where in the dream we are engaging with multiple characters, we're doing all kinds of different things, we're going to different places, there's space in the dream, there's time in the dream, and yet when we wake up in the morning, we realize everything that it was experienced was a dream, and the dream was our own dream, and the dream was made up of the nature of our own consciousness. The substratum of the dream was our own consciousness. What gave life to the dream was our own being and none other. And of course, you know, Buddha, the word Buddha means to awaken. What does the Buddha awaken to? He awakens to the fact that life is also the same. When we die, we recognize that, in fact, everything we experienced was exactly the same, none other than only mind collapses down into a single event, as it were, you know, life as a dream. And we wake up from that dream, we go into another dream, we forget that we're dreaming. And this is the cycle over and over again. So plant medicines for me can be a double delusion. You're in a dream, thinking you're in an objective reality within an objective reality. But if you are able to comprehend and to penetrate to the truth of the nature of your experience in the journey work, in your entheogenic experience, you can bring that valuable insight back up to the physical level of reality and understand it is also exactly the same. Just because you meet other people and talk to them, it doesn't mean they have objective or it simply is exactly the same as a dream. In a dream, you're meeting other people. And when you meet a real person, there's space between you. But when you meet a dream person, there's space between you. There's time in the dream. It takes time to talk to another person. And yet when you wake up, the space was only in your mind. The time was only in your mind. The other person was only in your mind. Well, likewise with the experiences on the medicines. I think we can gain very, very valuable insight and liberation even by understanding, whilst we're there in the middle of the journey, this is only my mind, this is only consciousness, but not in a reductionist sense. I'm not suggesting that it's all just brain chemistry, or rather I am, but it's all just brain chemistry, including the idea of the brain. In other words, you know, the physicality of ourself is also included within that dimensional sphere of the dream reality that we're experiencing, and we ourselves lie outside of that somewhere.
So this brings an interesting question for me, subjective versus objective. Would it be possible, or do you think it's likely that part of the challenge there is how we are trained in, at least in Western culture? I'm not sure how it happens in other cultures, but the idea that of religion, the idea of God, the idea of everything of usefulness being outside of self, and that in Journey, the point is to reconnect to that spark of God, that aspect of self that is all that is. And so the difficulty is in undoing the training that says you have to look out, not look in. And then even though you start looking in, you still want to objectify what's in, because that's what we're used to doing. Oh, this can't be mine, or this must not be me, or this must be something telling me about something else rather than me. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
To a certain degree. I mean, I think these categories dissolve. I think that the internal external dualism is a false dichotomy, and it dissolves very quickly upon insight and realization. Is that idea that there is an inside and outside is a kind of a false idea.
Love it. All right.
I agree. I think that we've been taught to look outside and to give our power over to others, and to believe that we have to placate a mad god sitting on a cloud somewhere. So I think that it is important to recall the nature of our interior experience as being our own. In the same way, I believe it's important to recall the psychic phenomenon we experience as our everyday reality back into the idea of back into the idea of self only with a capital S.
Okay. Getting to the place of integrating that capital S self. Great.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next. So we've got a few more to go. I'm going to ask that we try to keep them condensed, because we have a lot of material there, but I want everybody to make sure that they're contributing and saying whatever they want to say about it. Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add to number one?
Nope.
All right, moving on. Conflating medicine with Eastern meditative paths, including shamans as gurus. That one's pretty straightforward.
It is. Yeah, I think it's a problem. I think that the movement generally was, as Westerners, so-called, we grew up in the Judeo-Christian religions, or at least with that as a background in our cultural experience, and a kind of a pretty mass rejection of that in the 60s and the 70s, when there was this very big movement over towards the Eastern meditative tradition, some others also, but mainly Buddhism and yoga, and these other traditions became very popular in the West and continue to be very popular. And so that became, actually, in terms of the alternative view, the primary model of spirituality that people adopted. Words like karma and enlightenment and meditation and all these kinds of things, that became actually the primary subculture or mode of religious expression. And then there was this movement towards shamanism, and we took that baggage with us, is how I feel about it. We took some of our Judeo-Christian heritage over when we were viewing shamanism and shamanic practice and shamans. We also very much brought over this Eastern view of spirituality and tried to implant it or paste it over shamanic practice. And in my view, it's a grave mistake. They're not the same.
So meaning you can be a shaman and not be a guru, and you can be a guru and not be a shaman. Is that?
Oh, absolutely. They can be the same, but it's not very common or often. Different modes of expression. They have very different functions even, you know. The shamanic function and the guru function are not the same in my view. You know, you might get some pretty enlightened so-called shamans, but they're few and far between for the most part. You know, shamanism is quite it's an old tradition to begin with. It has a lot of baggage with regards to the nature of lots of different things, including attitudes to women, including this sort of, you know, inherent dualism, etc. There's lots of things about it that aren't very Eastern meditative at all. And the primary one being really that that shamanism is not and has never been a path to enlightenment or liberation. It never understood those terms. It never really had those terms as part of its lexicon or its methodology or its intention. It wasn't designed to bring you to a state of freedom. It was designed to make connection with the natural world, including the hidden orders of reality, and very much so as objective states and phenomenon, not as mind stuff only, as the Eastern meditative paths would have. And then, of course, you know, the danger is in conflating gurus and shamans is you know, actually it's proved very problematic in terms of the level of abuse that has been acted out on Western women, particularly by lots and lots of different shamans all over the world. Because the truth is, shamans don't have to have any kind of ethical or moral root or ground in order to gain or grow power. Whereas, of course, in the Eastern meditative traditions, the ethical and morality aspect of it, like the niyamas and the yamas of the Ashtanga yoga tradition, are 100% essential. You can't grow or move along the path until you have perfected your yamas and niyamas, your ethical and moral injunctions. In shamanism, you can do as you please and gain power for the most part. You might get into trouble later on, and you might have problems with some spirits, but you know, it's a path of power, not of wisdom necessarily.
So it would be say, I mean, what keeps going through my head is shaman equals medicine man, guru equals teacher. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's yeah.
I mean,
well, guru, I mean, there's different levels of both of these things. There's different levels of gurus and there's different levels of shaman. You know, the top level of the guru, the sat guru is the one who really is able to eat your karma and bring you to ultimate liberation through grace. Now, the shamanic function is not that. You know, the shamanic function ultimately on the light side of things is to heal and to, you know, bring healing and to awaken powers and abilities and things. You know, and on the darker side, obviously, you know, more nasty things, cursing and killing, etc. But you know, not to have this ability to sort of, you know, actually take you by the hand and walk you to the path of freedom. That hasn't really ever been the shamanic purview.
Very cool. All right, Jeff, anything there that you'd like to add?
No, I'm following along. It's all good. Enjoying it.
Number 3, that snake oil salesman. One time cures all. Yeah, I think that's an interesting, pretty straightforward one as well, but very interesting. I know in my own experiences that was something that has come up numerous times where, you know, people think they do one and I'm all better forever.
Gosh, if only it was that easy.
Right.
The Dalai Lama was asked, you know, if there was a pill that you could take that would bring you to, you know, full Buddhist enlightenment, would you take the pill? And of course, the interviewer was expecting the Dalai Lama to say no. You know, there should be hard work involved. And the Dalai Lama was, you know, give me 100, I'll give them out now. You know, kind of. So, you know, actually, you know, Buddhism and its purview, its stated intention is to, you know, bring one to a state of freedom from suffering. And however one does that, you know, one can and should do it. You know, we're trying to get free of suffering. Whatever brings us freedom from suffering, let's do that. Let's get there as far as possible. And of course, we want that as soon as possible, and we take that idea into the medicine and into whatever else we're doing, and we expect there to be a kind of a no effort involved, and that it's all going to be very easy, and because our friends has this great experience on the medicine, or this enlightened experience on the medicine, or experience of this phenomenon or that phenomenon, that it must be so easy, and that we can get there in a single go. But of course, it's not that easy. I'm afraid it does require work. These things are only tools, or should be tools, on the path to freedom. They should go together hand in hand with a meditation practice, with an energy-based practice, with a body-based practice, with a mindfulness-based practice, in order to get any real benefit from it. Otherwise, you just go super high, have a very strange experience, and then you come back down again, and you can't really necessarily integrate that experience because you haven't built the energy body to be able to hold that amount of energy or information, and it just fizzles away over time. And this is the nature of it, and we mustn't be naive into thinking, into believing that actually it can be that simple. Traditional spiritual practice takes a very long time. There's a lot to uncover. There's a lot to purify. There's a lot to kind of reveal and to explore in these inner worlds before we can really come to know the self in its entirety. So the idea that we can drink a medicine a single time and know everything is just absurd. There are many levels of experience in the medicine, many different levels of phenomenon, many different levels of spiritual reality that can be experienced, and all of it is relevant and interesting and useful if we understand it correctly.
So we want to be, I want to be clear here, so that as those that are listening and interested in this process, it is true that you can catapult your experience through the interaction with plant medicine, but that catapult, or that quantum jump, comes because you have a foundation established, that you have some kind of meditative practice, you're working with your energy actively, and then you're using your focus and intention to step into this experience that can definitely expand in ways that you would never imagine. But then from that objective subjective conversation, you bring it back home and you take it into the platform which you've built, and you allow that to begin to inform your experience, and use that as stuff that you meditate with, that you contemplate, that you open to, as a way of transforming various aspects of your experience. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the bottom line is it's about the nature of energy. Actually, ultimately, the medicines give you a very big boost of energy. Call it prana, call it chi, call it ruach, call it num. That's a Kalahari desert term. You call it whatever you like. Massive influx of energy kickstarts one's own internal energy body. Kundalini body, the chakra body, the Dantian body, the energy body at large. It gets awoken, and in becoming awake, the more energy there is in the system, the more we're able to access different states and conditions of consciousness. They go together hand in hand. Energy equals availability of consciousness, or access to consciousness. So the more energy, the more we're able to experience. So we have this massive influx. It gives a massive boost. Kundalini awakens, the chi or the dragon force awakens. We enter into exotic states of consciousness, exotic phenomenon. And then when the energy leaves the system, we come back down again, and not very much remains other than the memory of it. However, if we've done a lot of energy work, if we've built the channels, if we've done breathing practices, pranayama practices, qigong practices, martial art practices, whatever it may be, then we've built the wiring that contain those states of consciousness until ultimately they transform into stages of consciousness, which are more permanent conditions, and then ultimately to the realization, hopefully, of consciousness as a whole.
Right on. That actually was a great explanation, and took it even way further than I was contemplating. That's pretty cool. Okay, the next step here in our process, again, we've got to keep them a little shorter, taking messages literally and personally. Tell me about that.
Well, I would say it goes hand in hand with the first one to a certain degree. You know, obviously, if you take things as being objective and real with a capital R, you're much more likely to take things literally and personally also. And I know in my own experience and the experience of the many people that I've worked with, this is a very big mistake. Yes, you can receive all kinds of very personal, potent and particular messages on the medicines, and they can be very, you know, like be at this specific place at a specific time. You're going to meet a specific individual. They're going to do this. They're going to do that, and it seems like you can't possibly be making this stuff up. Why would you make this stuff up? And therefore, there must be some level of objective truth to it, some literal truth to it. However, upon exploring that message and going to meet that person, for example, we find 99% of the time that actually there's no person, it doesn't happen. And what I would suggest is actually that we are purging. The nature of ayahuasca in particular, La Purga is one of its names, is to purge unconscious material. And it comes up in all kinds of ways, and it comes up in our experience in ways that we think it's coming from some kind of God, it's coming from some kind of spirit, it's coming from Mother Ayahuasca, and that it must therefore mean something very real, and it must be taken very literally and acted upon very literally. However, it is, in my opinion, just psychic content coming up in order to be released and to be let go of. Including everything about contacting all the people that we've hurt in the past and, making good with them, and all these kinds of messages that people receive, including and especially, let's say, the megalomaniacal, you are the next messiah, you are the next shaman, you are the next guru, your job is to create a new religion. That whole old story, which we've done over and over again. It's just people taking this stuff way too literally, way too personally, when in fact it's just stuff. Just let it go. Don't take it so personally.
Stuff. All right, last, believing in the objective nature of phenomenon. And I know this is specific to the wild show that is potential when you go on a journey. I'm assuming that's going to be talking about again, part of the dream. It's the dream aspect of what you were saying.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same, really. This is the same as the first one that we discussed. And belief as a whole is always a dangerous thing, in my view. I suggest you should move away as much as possible from believing stuff into experiencing it, and then phenomenologically categorizing it sensibly. And not just believing. I mean, belief is nothing. It doesn't change reality. It doesn't influence reality. It doesn't need to be based on reality. I'm afraid that the religions, in my view, for sure, are
Whoops. There he is.
Hello.
Hello. He disappeared for a second. All right, we're going to jump ahead a little bit here because we do have one of our viewers has a question. Shirley has a great question, actually, which dovetails into our conversation as we move away from those top 5 things, now getting into understanding what do you do with stuff when you bring it back? How do you integrate it? And as Shirley says, what are some ways to integrate our journeys into our everyday life? Great question, Shirley, and I think probably all of us have some version of that, but we'll let Paul start with that. We have about 2 or 3 minutes on this, and then we got to bring it to a close.
Okay. Hi, Shirley. It's interesting, isn't it? A lot of the material of these journeys, actually, it's very difficult to integrate a lot of it. Particularly, I would say, ayahuasca and the DMT realms are quite hard to integrate. You know, we're talking about aliens, we're talking about you know, different dimensions of being that don't necessarily have a lot to do with our everyday lives or our normal condition. And I think that's important to realize, because, you know, they're not the same, and they're not necessarily meant to be somehow kind of blended together. I would suggest that actually what we're trying to do and what we need to do is understand the fundamental nature of the experience in the medicine, which, as I've said previous in this conversation, in my view, is consciousness only, mind stuff only, is to bring back that fundamental realization, that one thing only that can change everything. It's not going to be particularly helpful for you anyway to integrate what this alien being told you on the medicine. It's not so helpful. It may have some good advice for you. You know, maybe you want to listen to it, but maybe you want to be more discriminating and not pay attention to that particularly. And instead, again, just bring back through this primary realization that you had all these interior experiences, that they were of the nature of mind stuff, and to see that in your everyday experience, to look at the phenomenon that you experience on a daily level with the same eyes, with the same understanding. This somehow really changes reality. It somehow changes your fundamental experience to the point where you ultimately become a master of your reality. You know, of course, in the Indian tradition, there's plenty of stories of grandmasters, you know, being able to levitate and fly and walk through walls and all this kind of thing, because they've understood the nature of reality as being none other like a dream only. So this is the fundamental realization I suggest we want to try and integrate. The rest of the stuff, we can take it or leave it as we like. Don't take any of it too literally. Don't take any of it too personally. Take it very lightly, but with a primary interest in the mechanism behind the generation of these internal realities, or of realities as a whole, wherever they may be.
Wow. Shirley, thank you for that amazing question. And Paul, thank you for that amazing answer. I know, Jeff, did you have some question to throw into this particular mix?
Well, I can only so far speak from using psilocybin as a plant-based medicine, but I know that each of the journeys that I've had the wonderful opportunity to experience, by setting an intention in advance, I've actually gotten specific answers to specific questions I've had regarding understanding what the universe is, how it works, who I am, what my purpose is here, even to the extent of all the relationships that I've ever been in, that I could see how they've unfolded. And it's almost like the puzzle. I would describe it as missing puzzle pieces get filled in. There's a greater awareness and understanding of literally how, for me, everything fits together and everything works. So for me, the integration piece of something out of journey back into applying it to your life comes from the journaling that takes place after the journey, or there's times where I'll even have an electronic device that I will get an inspiration and I'll reach over and hit record, and I'll just start talking about what I'm experiencing, knowing I'm going to listen to it afterwards. And fantastically enough, it actually makes sense afterwards, which is really fascinating. So my experience thus far has been, each and every time I've done a journey, there's been something to bring back and to fill in another piece of the puzzle for myself. So I think Paul would be able to talk more about the differences of the types of medicines with regard to, I don't know where the question was coming from, but I think the type of medicine is probably a factor in that.
No, I think it's a very valid point, Jeff. I didn't mean to be sort of dismissive of that is available under the influence of journey, both medicine-based or non-medicine-based. There's no doubt, of course, there's all kinds of material one's life. I don't disagree. Primary realization, which is that which I've been speaking about, is not to say that they're not incredibly but they're not necessarily going to be the final liberating force, in my view, because unless we understand the nature of reality with a capital R and how and where that's being generated from, we're just kind of sorting through the minutiae of our it can help you to understand the puzzle we are, but I want to know what the puzzle box is and where the puzzle pieces go in that. It's like I'm interested in the box ultimately.
Right.
Right on. Well, this has been another amazing conversation. Appreciate you all and all of the great stuff and information as we looked into this topic of journeying. Hope you, as the listeners out there, have had learned a lot, or at least got a lot of pieces filled in for you about this process of engaging with or without plant medicine, but finding that ability to alter your state or shift state so that you can allow access to the deeper parts of yourself and understanding the essence of energy in the context of who you are and your relationship to this universe. Please check out all the things that Paul has to offer down in he's doing stuff through Patreon, and if you go to tantraya.com, you can find out more about him and his work and all the cool things going on there. Please come to adventuresinTruthpodcast.com or adventuresinTruth.com. You can check out our website and see us and all our various offerings. And we're really glad you were here today. Thanks for being here, everybody, and have an amazing day, an amazing night, an amazing rest of your week.
Thank you, Paul, and look forward to having you on again.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Rest well, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.